Thank you. Very good morning.
Morning.
Yes, Paul Tan Kun Dick.
Yeah.
He preached at Paul.
Really.
Yes.
Okay, so the text we are looking at this morning is chapter 22, verse 1 to verse 6. And as the title was read by Casey, he upended evil. Upended means to turn around now, to turn on his head, right? And so he actually turned evil into something that is positive, to live, right? live. And incidentally, like we just mentioned this morning, evil starts with E-V-I-L, right? And when you turn it around, actually it L-I-V-E, right?
Yes, correct.
Just coincidentally. And so anyway, this text that we're looking at this morning is from chapter 22. And chapter 22 from verse 7 onward, actually as you read on, you will find that it will be on Thursday afternoon already. As they begin to prepare for the Passover, which the Lord will then conduct what we know as the Last Supper at the evening of Thursday, after 6 p.m. But here what happens in verse 1 to verse 6 actually is something that took place probably Wednesday evening, anytime after 6 p.m. Because this is what is known by the Jews during the festival as the day of preparation. It actually, refers back to the Passover when they were, allowed to come out of Egypt. There was a day before the Passover when the Jews were supposed to do some preparation, which actually involves getting rid of every form of yeast within the house, so that when God calls them, they will be ready, with all the unleavened bread without any yeast. And so here is Luke, because he's such a dramatic writer, right? He is bringing in an aspect that I think when you kind of look at it more carefully, you would appreciate. Because this preparation day is when every Jewish family in their home would look for very meticulously and to get rid of any yeast so that they are ready for God's Passover. And so here, instead of getting rid of the yeast, which is a symbol of evil or sin, here you find that the religious leaders were planning all kinds of evil. And in fact, it even says, not only was evil, in the home where the Jewish leaders were gathered, sin itself or Satan himself entered into one of the person's heart. And so here Luke, in his way of writing, is kind of dramatizing, what is happening here. And that, when we look at this title, right, that God is able to turn evil intended by others for evil into good. Now that is one major theme, in the Bible. I think we all are aware of that, right? And so this morning, as I was preparing, I just realized that, biblical theology. Sometimes when we talk about biblical theology, wow, such a big word, what do you mean? Actually, when we say biblical theology, what it means is it is from the Bible, biblical, from the Bible. And so from the Bible, we read, we study, we understand the ways of God. That's theology. Theology is to understand, to study, to know what God is like and what are the ways in which God makes himself known, to sinners, right? And so biblical theology basically is from the Bible, from the Word, we study, we learn, we understand the ways of God and therefore who God is, what God is like. And one major theme in biblical theology, of course, is that God is a faithful God. Amen.
Yes.
Throughout the Bible, you will find it is repeated again and again that God is a faithful God who keeps his covenant with his people. Amen. And that is seen throughout the Bible. For example, Noah. God made a promise to Noah never to destroy the earth again in the same manner. And he even put a rainbow, to show his covenant that he will keep his promise. And the covenant-keeping God, is also shown in his relationship with Abraham. When he called Abraham and said, I will bless you and I will make you a father of many nations. And your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the sands in the seashore. And that is exactly what the promise that God kept. The sons of Abraham really is countless. Not only in terms of the Jewish nation, but every person who comes to faith in God becomes a son of Abraham, a descendant of Abraham. And therefore God's covenant with Abraham is always kept. Now God's covenant-keeping character is also seen in his relationship with Moses. Right? I will raise you up so that you can deliver my people from Egypt and bring them into a land flowing with milk and honey. And God accomplished all that until the nation of Israel was settled in the land of Canaan, and then even the Jerusalem city, the city of God, was also settled. And so we find that the Bible, throughout its entirety, shows us that God is a covenant-keeping God. And therefore, when we come to the New Testament, when Jesus said, now this covenant is made in my blood. We can be so assured, that God keeps his covenant. Amen.
Amen.
That we are part of the covenant of the forgiveness of God through the blood of the Lamb. And therefore our hearts can be fully settled that we will never lose our salvation. And so besides this huge theme of the faithfulness of God, another theme that is very clear in the Bible is that God is able to turn evil into good. Amen.
Amen.
Especially against those who plan evil against him or his purposes. God is able to turn the situation around so that actually good comes about. Now this principle you may be familiar with the account of in the book of Esther, in chapter 3 verse 6 especially, when a man called Haman had evil designs against the people of God. Actually, he wanted to obliterate them. He wanted to get rid of all of them. And because he was favored by the Persian king, Xerxes, and so then he planned how he can not just only ill-treat or get Mordecai into trouble, but through Mordecai then to get rid of the Jewish nation. And that was Haman's plans, right? But God then was able to turn that evil around and then what? Had Mordecai promoted and then all the nation of Jews saved. That, of course, is an example of, the ability of God to turn evil into good. Then, of course, the most famous example of this theme would be that of Joseph, right? Joseph, whom the brothers were jealous of, and then threw him in a pit, and then ill-treated him, and then sold him, to the slave traders, right? Hoping to just, be rid of him completely. But God was able to turn that evil into good. Joseph himself said so. So that Joseph eventually was promoted to be the second highest authority in the land of Egypt in order that the people of God may survive the famine. And so here I want to just clarify something. Well, we often say that yes, God is able to turn evil into good. We want to realize that God is able to do that only for evil against him or evil against his purposes. I want to clarify that now. Because it is not the same thing to say, oh, whatever misfortune happens to me, or God will be able to turn that evil into good. I don't think we should be so presumptuous to apply the principle of God, to say that, whatever misfortune happened to me, God would also turn it around for good. Because why? Sometimes the misfortune has taken place because of our own sin. And therefore, then there are consequences that we need to bear. And so that applies to the plans of God, to people who plan evil against God. God will surely be able to turn that evil so that his plans will not be thwarted, and especially so that his people will live. The people will not be, annihilated or be obliterated, but God's people will live because God has a purpose for his people in this world. And that's very different from applying the principle of God to ourselves. I tell you what, because in the past and before I knew God, right, there were times when I very proudly say,天无作人之路了，天无绝人之路. But I said that out of pride, and so then I found myself in a dead end because of my own silliness. But then I just proudly say,天无作人之路了, But I said that even without knowing God. And so I said, we must not apply this characteristic of God to every situation. But we can be sure that if it involves the purposes of God, the plans of God, the people of God, God would not allow evil to triumph. And so he has a way of doing that. And so actually that is what I think Luke kind of, demonstrates to us in these first 6 verses in chapter 22. And so we mentioned just now, right, that this was something that took place anytime after 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Because for the Jewish, right, the day begins at 6 p.m. And so Wednesday evening after 6 is actually almost into the day of preparation. And so then the people were, supposed to get rid of all the forms of yeast within the home to signify that they are cleansing, they are purifying themselves, they are consecrating themselves, waiting for the Passover to take place, as it did the first Passover. And so here I want to just quickly note, for the Jews, right, they observe the day, the beginning of the day from 6 p.m. That's very different from us, right? And the reason they do that is because in Genesis, the writer writes, right, it was evening and then it was morning. It was the first day. And so Genesis gives us an understanding that actually the day, as far as the work of God is concerned, it begins on the evening 6 p.m. And the day ends at 6 p.m. or 5:99, the next day on the evening. Now here, I think the Jews have it right when they observe the day starting at 6 p.m. And I think I read this once before, so I want to just quickly share this nugget now. Because for us, right, who are non-Jews, we say, our day starts in the morning. And so when we wake up in the morning, this is my day, right? But for the Jews, their day starts at 6 p.m. according to Genesis. And also, therefore, according to the Jewish understanding, that in the evening, after that, we all go to sleep. But actually, for God, the day begins. And so the work of God continues, even though we are all fast asleep. And that is the proper understanding of our relationship with God. While we sleep, God is already active at work. And so the next morning when we wake up, it is not my day, I begin my day. No, God has already been working since 6 p.m. the previous day. And therefore the day is halfway through, and now I wake up, I participate with God with what He's doing in the world. And for the Jewish understanding of the rhythm of life, I think they have it right. Because that is what the writer in Genesis tells us. It was evening, it was morning, it was the first day. And so here, therefore, is Wednesday evening. And then, therefore, Luke identifies this day as the day of preparation, because he says the Passover is approaching, not yet. And therefore, then maybe just quickly note that Passover would begin on Thursday after 6 p.m. And then until the next day, 6 p.m., it will be the end of the Passover, which is just only one day. And then from 6 p.m. the next day, it will begin the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which would last for 7 days. It is to allow the Jews to remember what happened when God passed over. The angel of death passed over God's people. And then they are to keep their houses, they are to keep their lives free from leaven. And so they have to make unleavened bread, so that then their tunic is stuck in. When God calls them, they have to be ready to go on the move with God, to come out of Egypt. And so that is all done in preparation, for the sense that they're waiting for God, they're prepared, they are cleansed, they are consecrated, waiting to move together with God. And so therefore that is the flow of the flow of the occasion now. You have the preparation day, then you have the Passover, and then begins the festival of the unleavened bread for 7 days after that. And so here then Luke records for us a certain irony. On this day, when sin and yeast is to be gotten rid of, what we find here is three personification, so to speak now. Three personification of evil. First, it is the teachers of the law and the elders of Israel and the chief priests, right? That's one. Second, it is the source of all evil. It is Satan himself, who is also active, that Luke identifies here. And then lastly, it is a tool that Satan used, one who had belonged to the group, a person called Judas. And so these three personalities are highlighted by Luke on this day of preparation. Okay? And so we are told that this event now occurred. It is on the day of preparation that the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus. There is such irony captured here, right? This was a day when they were supposed to get rid of sin, get rid of yeast. Remember, God is coming. But instead, they were preparing to get rid of God Himself. And so Luke wants us to recognize this, right? Now, the chief priests and the teachers of the law here will symbolize those who are anti-Jesus, right? And therefore they do not acknowledge that Jesus is God. They do not acknowledge His divinity, one. And they also have rejected Him, so to speak, right? And therefore they have placed themselves, as And so the chief priests and the teachers of the law, even Luke just mentioned chief priests and teachers of the law. I think here we can include all the other characters that were mentioned in the earlier chapters, right? Chapter 21 and chapter 20 and chapter 21, which means the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, and all those other people who were anti-God, anti-Christ at this moment. And so here Luke, kind of using chief priests and the teachers of the law to probably include everybody else who stood in opposition against the Lord. And so they were looking for some way to get rid of him. But they were afraid of the people. Meaning, while they want to get rid of him, they have to look for an opportunity to do that. They cannot get rid of him when the crowd was around, because they feared that the crowd was very much with him, because of his teaching, because of his lifestyle, because of his status, and his authority. And so if they had to do anything to Jesus while the crowd was around, they were afraid that the crowd would turn against them. And therefore, those who were anti-Jesus were looking for an opportunity that they may be able to get rid of him, right? For they were afraid of the people. And then that's the first group that we see here. And then the second character that is mentioned here, then Satan. And so Satan here, of course, is recognized as the enemy of God, right? He would want to thwart, the purposes of God. And so here he is mentioned briefly. But when you look at the other gospel accounts, it details a little bit more of what he's up to. Okay? But here Luke just mentioned that Satan, is one who wants to thwart the plans of God. And then what we have then is Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. Now, Iscariot actually identifies Judas as belonging to a certain family, and Iscariot actually is a family who lived actually in the south of the land, because all the other disciples live in the north, where Galilee is. But Judas Iscariot actually belongs to the south in a city called Kerioth. I think in some other gospel account it is mentioned he's from Kerioth. And so here, Kerioth is actually a place that is a lot more sophisticated, because Galilee and the north, is where the fishermen, right? Peter and all those are fishermen. But Judas Iscariot is identified as from the city of Kerioth, from the south, where it is not kind of, fishermen, but more sophisticated, Jewish society. And so here Iscariot is mentioned. He's one of the 12. He's one of the 12 disciples that Jesus had called to himself. And yet here we see Judas being identified as the one who is going to betray the Lord. Judas therefore went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. And therefore we are told that the temple guards and the chief priests, who were looking for an opportunity, right, to want to get rid of Jesus, saw Judas therefore then as an opportunity for them to carry out their plans. And therefore they were delighted and they agreed to give him money. And then Judas also consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when there was no crowd that was present. They will rise up against their actions. And therefore here we see the three groups, right? One was the chief priests and the teachers of the law, representing, as it were, all those religious sects, who were anti-Christ. And then you have Satan himself, who is the motivating force behind all these things that were happening. And then you have Judas, who is being used, to provide the information as to how then those who were the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the officers of the temple guard would be able then to arrest Jesus and do to him what they were planning against him. Now here in this account, right, in verse 1 to verse 6, actually Luke records for us the forces that were rising up in the background but not yet out in the open. And their intention was to arrest him and to be rid of him. Now I read this, and so I want to just share this with us, right? Now the chief priests and the teachers of the law were afraid of what the crowd would do. And so they were fixed on arresting Jesus and then incapacitating him so that he will be separated from the crowd, so to speak. And then their intention probably would be to wait until the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is over. And so the intention was to keep Jesus in seclusion, keep him perhaps in kind of, under arrest, and then deal with him or get rid of him when the festival was over, when the crowd had all dispersed and gone back. Satan, of course, also would like to have that happen because he was afraid of what Christ represented, and therefore then he was happy to go along with this timetable of what the teachers of the law were doing. Judas, on the other hand, was looking for that opportunity, that he may be able to set his own agenda, get his own agenda going. Because Judas at this point already had begun to understand that Jesus was not coming, and then he's not going to come and rise up, as the king of as the Messiah, so that Judas then will be able to enjoy, the benefits and the privileges of associating with Jesus. And therefore he had now joined hands, with the religious rulers and Pharisees, to be rid of Jesus. Now, there was an important principle I wanted to bring up, but in my excitement now I can't remember. Just give me some time to let my mind settle.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
Okay, it's related to our title, which is
Evil over the list.
okay.
He append evil to live.
Can we have some music?
Come again, some music. Thank you so much, sister.
The silent is the day I post up. I love that song.
轻轻听
Okay, someone sing King Tia, then I can just refresh my mind in a moment. King King, 轻轻听，我要轻轻听。
The rhythm is very nice. I love to see OH, they sing Hokkien.
Ching ching ting, 我要轻轻听，认得我声音。大牧者，生命的主宰，一生只听我主声音。生命的主宰，我一生听见我声音。认得我声音，是大牧者，生命的主宰，我一生只听主声音。生命的主宰，认得我声音。认得我声音。Okay, the main thought has not come back. But I guess what we see here would be, the devices, the plans of those who were working against the Lord lah. But behind all their devices, behind all their trickery, the Lord actually is fulfilling his role in having come. Amen.
Amen.
And so here, it's like seeing behind the activities of the three groups of people, right? The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, then also, the one who is motivating them, so to speak, Satan, who wants to be rid of Jesus, and then Judas, who surrendered himself actually to the wiles of the devil, and then became a part of this plan to get rid of Jesus. And yet, all of these things that is happening is part and parcel of what God is accomplishing. Alright, so behind, sometimes these activities that takes place, actually God is also bringing about the passing of his plans.
Yes.
And I think, Luke captures this thing here in these first 6 verses for us to appreciate and see the things that are happening on the surface, but also beneath the surface, that yet God is accomplishing his will, his purposes, which will not be thwarted by the evil plans of man. Amen. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start